Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to Grand Rounds. My name is Tom Fodden. I'm the chair and organizer of Grand Rounds. We have a few slots that recur through the year, such as the DCAT lectures, and we have a Black History Month and the LGBTQ plus month. One of the real highlights in terms of recurring presentations are the Ronald Harden Awards. And there are a couple of these that crop up. And the one we're going to hear about today is the BMSc Medical Education Awards, where we hear from students who've taken a time away from the core medical degree between third and fourth year to do a BMSc Medical Education. They're going to present some of their work, and we have the opportunity at the end to vote for whoever is going to win the award. Everyone's a winner here at Grand Round, so the three who've already made it this far have done incredibly well. But there will be a winner, and that will be voted for at the end. I'm always struck by how cool, calm, and collected our students seem to be in this sort of environment. I try to put myself back to when I was a third or fourth year medical student, which is the late 90s, and I think I would have been absolutely petrified about standing up in front of a grand round audience. So it's really a testament to how cool and composed they are. I get to take a slight back seat here now, and Kevin McConville is going to take over the comparing of this, for which I'm very grateful. The usual Zoom rules apply. Please keep your microphones muted unless you're doing the active bit of speaking. Feel free to leave your camera on if you wish, or turn it off if you're having your lunch. This session works best if there's some questions. So if you do have some questions, please put them into the chat or ask them in between the presentations, and then there's voting at the end. This will go online once I've had an opportunity to edit it, and you can look at previous Ronald Harden Awards on the channel, as well as all the other Grand Rounds going back to about 2015. Kevin, that's my preamble. Thanks very much for comparing today, and to the three students, good luck.
Thanks, Tom. And thank you very much for being the host again within this. It's my pleasure, along with my co-BMSc Med Ed lead, Dr. James McMillan, to welcome among our three finalists. These students were chosen from poster presentations that they did at the end of last week. So they know that the format is in around 8 to 10 minutes of a presentation, an opportunity for some questions and answers and turnover. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to our first speaker, who's Hannah Bain.
Hi, thank you. Can everyone see the screen okay?
You haven't shared it yet, Hannah.
Oh, okay, hang on. Sorry, I thought I'd already shared it. Is that it now?
That's it, yeah.
Perfect. I'll just zoom in a little bit. Okay, so thank you everyone for having me today. My name is Hannah, and I'm one of the BMSc Medical Education students. So my project was on exploring medical students' preparedness for navigating interprofessional dynamics in the clinical environment. So just to start off with a little bit of background, as I'm sure a lot of you are aware, interprofessional working and collaboration is really essential to create an effective healthcare team and to promote positive working and improve patient care. And as such, the World Health Organization, along with the GMC and other organizations, have recognized it's really essential for medical students to gain some interprofessional education in the medical curriculum. So these interprofessional education activities are typically structured activities that involve medical students working with other healthcare professional students and learning from them. And there's been extensive research surrounding IPE. However, there's been much less research focusing on how interprofessional learning can occur in the natural kind of informal clinical environment. And as Risa all highlighted, there's less research focusing on how medical students actually interact with the whole interprofessional team. So because of this, I formed these three research questions here. So firstly, I wanted to know, how do medical students interact with the interprofessional team on clinical placement? How do interprofessional education curricular activities in the earlier years help prepare medical students for the interprofessional healthcare environment? And how do members of the interprofessional team perceive medical students' preparedness for dealing with interprofessional dynamics? So moving on to the methodology for this project. So a focused ethnographic approach was taken which basically ethnography is the study of human interactions. So this was quite appropriate for this project, as obviously I was looking at medical students' interaction with healthcare staff. And the data is collected in the form of field notes from observations and also from interviews. So a ward was chosen in the hospital and approximately 20 hours of observations were carried out within this ward. And following this, I was able to identify participants who I felt like would provide valuable insight to the research questions and invited them to interview. So in total, there was 11 participants who were interviewed, 5 of whom were medical students, and there were 3 fifth-year medical students and 2 fourth-year medical students. And then I also interviewed 3 doctors and 3 nurses. And then following this, a combination of inductive and deductive thematic analysis was used also through the application of a conceptual framework of professional humility. So this basically involved initially identifying data that relates to professional humility and also helps understand medical students' preparedness for navigating interprofessional dynamics. And yeah, as I said here, I used the 6-step process from Braun and Clark's there. So following this, I was able to identify 3 main themes, which are these 3 blue boxes here. And there was also 8 sub-themes, which I'll discuss as well. So the first theme was facilitating positive interprofessional working. So this basically involved the students and the staff identifying factors that they felt like helped improve interprofessional working. So the first sub-theme was combating the hierarchy with respect. And all participants highlighted that mutual respect between all healthcare professionals and students really does help create a better working environment and helps reduce the presence of the hierarchy within healthcare teams. The second sub-theme was named resolving interprofessional tensions. So all the participants identified that interprofessional tensions can happen in the clinical environment, and it is understandable due to the kind of high stress nature of the environment. However, that it's important to acknowledge and apologise for any behaviour, and the students really highlighted how they observed and learned a lot of their behaviours from healthcare staff they encountered, and they complimented the staff for being particularly positive. And then the final sub-theme was having an awareness of professional roles and their boundaries. So all participants, including staff and students, really highlighted the importance of having an awareness of each role, and they would often kind of learn from other healthcare professionals as well. So the next sub-theme was building interprofessional skills. So this was kind of the different things that contributed to their interprofessional learning. So the medical students detailed previous interprofessional education experiences, some of which included interprofessional days with nursing students. Also, some students had undergone simulation activities with nursing students. However, all the medical students agreed that interprofessional learning on clinical placement itself has been the most beneficial experience to help aid their interprofessional learning, especially when students are proactive at seeking out their own opportunities. So there were some students who would go and organise to spend the afternoon shadowing physiotherapists or other allied health professionals. And finally, the other sub-theme within this theme was the effect of the environment. So students also, as well as staff, highlighted the importance of a supportive environment, and students were much more likely to want to stay in the ward for longer and get to know the whole team if they felt welcomed. And then finally, we had the role of time. So this was split into 2 sub-themes. The first sub-theme being the internalisation of interprofessional dynamics. So this basically highlighted that participants believed that interprofessional dynamics and the understanding of this really improved over time and through placement experiences. So through time, they were able to gain further understanding of roles, but also individually just develop their own confidence and their ability to communicate with other health professionals. And then finally, the last sub-theme was how extended placements help foster interprofessional relationships. So as I said, I interviewed 4th and 5th year medical students, and the 5th year medical students had spent quite an extended period of time on this ward. So they'd really got to know the whole healthcare team, including the nurses and allied health professionals, and they were able to form more meaningful interprofessional relationships and kind of seek out learning opportunities, as opposed to the 4th years who were sort of coming and going and moving around a lot and not really getting to know a full team. So just back to my conclusion. So the staff and students agreed that understanding how to deal with interprofessional dynamics does improve with time and through clinical experience. The students did have mixed opinions on previous interprofessional education. However, they did all believe that being on clinical placement and getting to interact with other healthcare professionals has been the most beneficial experience. And they also agreed that there are lots of opportunities for interprofessional learning in the clinical environment, especially if the students do look out for these. And then finally, the staff and students identified factors that that affect medical students' interactions with the interprofessional team. And this, as I said, includes the overall environment, things like individuals' confidence, and also the length of clinical placement. So following all this, moving on to my recommendations. So I think from all this, it's really kind of quite an overarching thing. It's really important to encourage medical students to seek their own interprofessional learning opportunities. So perhaps having like an induction for students prior to starting placement in fourth year to really just emphasize the importance of interprofessional learning and interprofessional skills, and really just encouraging students to take charge of their own learning in this area. Also, as I said, interprofessional dynamics does take time to develop. So this supports the earlier kind of clinical introduction and being exposed to interprofessional teams from an earlier age in the medical career, to hopefully allow students, by the time they've reached the end of medical school, they'll have started building the interprofessional skills earlier and hopefully will be more prepared to being a doctor. Also, as I kind of highlighted, the students really stress the importance of staff kind of modeling behaviour. So I think it's really important to encourage healthcare staff to role model positive interprofessional traits and really just remind them of the influence that they have on students' learning, and that, you know, whether it's positive or negative traits, students can pick these up if they observe them on placement. And finally, as I kind of said about the extended placements, if possible, kind of bringing in more extended placements, especially for fourth year students, to give them an opportunity to get to know what it's like to be in the ward for an extended period of time and really get to know other members of the team instead of just coming in, sticking to the doctors and getting their sign-offs and leaving. And then finally, areas for further research. I think it'd be good to have further exploration of the interprofessional learning opportunities in the clinical environment on a larger scale. So obviously this was just kind of based on one ward. However, through interviews, participants were able to share insights from like lots of different experiences from different wards. But I think it'd be interesting to look at kind of maybe comparing wards, or also looking at in other settings. So perhaps in primary care or in outpatient clinics, that sort of thing. And then also, I think it'd be important to explore how other healthcare professionals perceive medical students in professional working. So as I said, I only interviewed medical students, doctors and nurses. So I think it'd be interesting to look at this and focus more on other allied health professionals, because it can't be known whether they would have the same perceptions as doctors and nurses. So yeah, thank you very much for listening. Please let me know if you have any questions.
Well done, Hannah. We have an opportunity for a couple of questions, maybe as people are thinking or not. One from me, and I appreciate I've, in a different sense from Tom, not done a ward round now in a very long time. So that ward environment is less as familiar to me. But you talked about that sense of time. And I know in the earlier years, in years 1 to 3 in the MBCHB curriculum, we provide some APE activities, and then it's really more embedded within that clinical world in years 4 and 5, which you've really done a good deep dive into. I'm just wondering about, in terms of your thoughts or observations about that asynchronous type of IP, if that makes sense, because the teaching activities are centered around a patient scenario, often where you all the AHPs, medics, etc., come together and talk about what they would do. But my experience in real life, certainly in general practice, if not in the ward rounds, is that happens more bitty, you know, aside from maybe ward rounds. Otherwise, people come and go around the patient at different times. And does that play into it at all, do you think?
Do you mean in terms of like the interactions that they have and things?
Yeah.
Yeah, so definitely from being on the, like when I did my observations on the ward, I generally stayed away from ward round time,
Okay.
because patient information and things were obviously not included in the study.
Okay.
But yeah, so a lot of it I think is just from medical students doing jobs from the doctors and then going to up to nurses or other allied health professionals and kind of communicating with them, as opposed to like it's kind of more them proactively going to them as opposed to prearranged meetings, if that makes sense. Yeah, so I and there were some students who I guess were more kind of willing to go and speak to other healthcare professionals as opposed to others, and that came up quite a lot through the interviews and from staff's perspectives as well.
So maybe some of the early activities, you know, your recommendations center on clinical experience, but the early activities maybe to try and enhance that trust so that you feel kind of, you know, the communication between each other, then they're more happy to do that.
Yeah, I think, well, a lot of the interprofessional education opportunities focus more on like medical students working with nursing students as opposed to nurses, or so I think obviously that's really good because you want to improve that communication and things, but I think then medical students might not feel comfortable going on the word speaking to actual healthcare professionals. But that kind of, I think, really only happens from just getting the confidence and going out there and doing it and getting to know people. So I'm not really sure what pre-activities could really help in that sense, other than just getting out and doing it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, that makes complete sense. Do you have any other questions from the audience? Or
James, do you have a question?
James?
Yes, I do. I found the mute button. I was thinking along similar lines to Kevin, and I was listening to see if he answered my question, and I'm not sure, but do refer me to your previous answer if you think you've already answered this. The thing that stood out to me was you said that some students felt that the earlier IPE was helpful, and that's always a trigger for me in these kind of things. So the question is, why was it useful for some and not for others? What was it about those sessions, or maybe just those individuals? Because we do ask the authentic clinical environment to do quite a lot of lifting often. You know, it would always be better if we're in authentic clinical spaces, but obviously there are reasons why that can't happen. So what is it that we can do in the classroom that will help? And why is it that some maybe responded to IPE teaching better than others? And that may be related to what you just said, or there may be some other things. I was just interested in if there were differences in context that made it stick for some and not for others.
Yeah, I think so. There's kind of a few different reasons. One of the things is that some of the students, so when the students spoke about a simulation experience that they'd had, however, that was something that they'd had on a placement, and it was like only a small number of students had had it. So I think there's an element of not all students received the same interprofessional education experiences. So my understanding is in 4th and 5th year, some students might have like pre-arranged structured activities that have been arranged by whomever, but it's not actually like every student is having that. Whereas in the in years 1 to 3, they have the kind of structured learning activities. And I think from that, it was mostly students just feeling like it was a bit artificial, or like it was a bit forced, kind of putting medical and nursing students together, and they didn't really see the full relevance of it, which is why it was better kind of in the clinical environment. Because I think the sessions they have is like ethical scenarios, and I think one of the students talked about a disaster scenario, and they just felt like it wasn't that relevant to actual medicine, hence why they weren't as like engaged in it, if that makes sense.
Yeah, so is it a case then of trying to sort of figure out where these ad hoc bespoke sessions are happening and try and pull some of that and feed it back into the sort of the main IP strand? Is that what you're suggesting?
Yeah, I think that would definitely be useful. I think like overall from my project, the findings were kind of more steering away from like structured IPE and really focusing on like how we can actually utilize the opportunities that are available already. So obviously like arranging simulation activities and things, that's all going to cost money. It takes time, it costs resources. Whereas like actually students just going up to a physio on the ward or something and asking, am I able to shadow you for the afternoon? That's not going to cost any money. It's not going to really be that disruptive to that person if they're happy for them to sit and shadow. So it's kind of more about trying to encourage students to utilize the opportunities that are already available, as opposed to, obviously I think increasing simulation activities and things would be good, but it's obviously a lot of more work. So this was kind of, I feel like my findings really highlights just the importance of trying to utilize the opportunities that are already there, but just students maybe aren't using them to the full ability.
Thanks very much.
Thank you, Hannah. Well, there may be more queries that come later, but for the purposes of time, we need to move on. So we may come back to you in due course within that. So our next speaker is Kieran Rose. Kieran?
Perfect. I'll just share my screen. Are you able to see that okay?
Yeah, we can see that fine. Over to you, Kieran.
Perfect. Thanks, Kevin. So my project was based at NHS 24. So just a bit of kind of background as to where my project came from. So I used to be a call handler at NHS24 and was until the discovery phase of the project. And when I worked there, I realised that when NHS24 make referrals to other health boards, sometimes they aren't very happy and they send feedback, and this is disseminated through the organisation. And I thought that it could be done more effectively because at times I didn't think it was very helpful, and sometimes it impacted nurse morale. So just a bit of introduction to NHS24, because I realise not everyone might know what it is. So it's the National Telecare Service for Scotland, and they are responsible for triaging in the out of hours period anyone who feels that they're unwell and needs to see a GP. So the project is around kind of learning dissemination, and linked to that is patient safety. And I'm sure everyone will appreciate that patient safety incidents continue to cause avoidable harm in healthcare. And it's estimated that 15,500 fewer people could die each year if our patient safety indicators performed at the top decile of the OECD countries. So it really is an important factor to be focusing on. So in terms of organisational learning dissemination, for this project, it referred to the processes through which insights from feedback, events and evaluations are shared or embedded across a service to improve practice. So this project used a human factors approach to explore how feedback from NHS24 partner organisations can be better operationalised to support nurse practitioner triage, and it was developed as a service development project. So the project, there was 3 individual project objectives, and these linked directly to the methodology. And so the first project objective was to explore and map the partner feedback landscape at NHS24 as a socio-technical system. So that was linked to Discover, which was the first phase of the project. The project was split into 4 phases using the Design Council's Double Diamond, and that aims to take a collaborative, iterative and solution-focused approach. And it's really about trying to identify problems within complex systems and create stakeholder-developed solutions. So the first phase, Discover, is about understanding the complex system, and there was 2 main data collection methods employed for that, which was document analysis and semi-structured interviews. Now my plan is just to talk through kind of limitations and strengths of the project as I go through. And one limitation here was that I was unable to carry out non-participant observation, which would have been one of an ideal data collection method for this phase, because I would have embedded myself into the system. But due to organisational policies at NHS24, that wasn't possible. So I think it's important now to introduce the kind of framework that was used throughout the project, really from aims to conclusions, and that's the System Engineering Initiative for Patient Safety, SIPS, particularly SIPS 2.0 by Harden et al. So this was served as a framework for the full project, from analysing the literature to develop data collection tools and then data analysis. And for data analysis, it was a deductive inductive method with SIPS being the framework, and then Braun and Clark's thematic analysis used for the inductive approach. And there was some quantitative data that was described descriptively. So just thinking about the Discover phase, so like I says, it's to understand the complex system. So just a quick summary from that is that the partner feedback system is broken into kind of 4 stages. So the first is that partner organisations that NHS24 refer to will complete a partner feedback form and send that to the NHS24 clinical governance team. So that might be from minor injury units, A&Es, GP out of hours service, the Scottish Ambulance Service. The form's logged on an electronic software called Respond and then sent to a clinical service manager for review. The instant, if it's for clinical investigation, the clinical service manager will allocate it to a team of senior charge nurses to conduct a clinical investigation. Once they do that investigation, they're asked to complete a range of thematic questions for organisational reporting, and that might be on the clinical conditions, so like abdominal pain, or it might be on the processes or systems that weren't working effectively. If a theme is identified, this may be selected for dissemination through the hot topic process, and if the clinical investigation goes as far as an adverse event, then learning will be shared via an adverse event learning summary. So all of the learning from the discovery phase then informs the define phase, which was about identifying a problem within the system. And for that, a questionnaire was used, and unfortunately the ideal would have been interviews and focus groups, but NHS 24 is under huge pressure at the moment with their nurse ratios, and they have a very tight kind of staffing issue. That means that wouldn't be appropriate to take people offline to do that. And considering the pressure that everyone in the NHS is under, I didn't think it was appropriate to start interviewing people in their spare time. So instead, we employed a questionnaire which offers flexibility for people to complete. So the questionnaire was used for both the define and the develop phase, with largely yes, no, and Likert scale questions used for the define phase, and an open text response for the develop phase. So we had 70 participants, most of whom were frontline nurse practitioners. And just thinking about the define phase, now there's lots of findings and it's very difficult to summarise these in 10 minutes, but just pulling out some of the key ones. So this graph is examining the tools and technologies, particularly accessibility and familiarity. And what we see is the hot topic, which is one of those learning dissemination methods that I mentioned. It's reasonably well accessed and people are familiar with it, and that's probably because they don't really have to access it. It comes to them by email. The adverse event learning summaries, which are held on an online website where people actively have to go and access them, and there are difficulties with people having the permissions to view them. There were issues with accessibility, and as such you would expect familiarity. And then there were some other methods of learning dissemination, which I'll not touch on, but there was variable responses, and that links to the kind of work patterns of nurses not being able to access certain learning events. One key factor that came through was in the external environment, which was Nursing and Midwifery Council revalidation. An external environment was an area that wasn't really touched on in the literature, and that kind of emphasises the importance of using this SIPS framework because it helps you take a very kind of holistic, wide system view. So nurses identified Nursing and Midwifery Council revalidation as a barrier. It was an issue, something that the organisation weren't supporting them with very well, but later on it was identified as a solution to help motivate nurses to get involved in learning dissemination. Moving on to develop, there was both this one kind of voting question about preferences for learning dissemination, and then the open text response asking people to suggest potential solutions to the problems that they face. And what we see with preferences is that people genuinely prefer in-person and active learning methods, which probably comes as no surprise to any of you, because we see this across all landscapes, medical, nursing, etc. And a potential solution to foster more of those opportunities was to have peer teaching. So I alluded to earlier that the organisation is under intense pressure, especially with its nurse staffing ratios. And there is very limited time and money in the organisation to provide additional learning opportunities. But nurses are already allocated 1.5 hours of CPD time a month. And what nurses are suggesting is that they teach each other during that time, utilising their pool of knowledge and experience. So nurses at NHS 24 tend to come from a wide variety of clinical backgrounds, from A&E, AMU, primary care to more specialised medical and surgical wards. So there is a huge amount of knowledge there that can be pulled on and reduces the resource required of the organisation to improve learning. So where a theme is identified, identifying someone in the team that is familiar with that area, such as abdominal pain, they could then do a teaching session on it. And the problem with that is that lots of organisational factors come into peer teaching, and these are in the literature and through the project, such as trust, kind of authoritative structures, the learning culture, etc. So just to try and pull things together, organisational structures and healthcare leaders must prioritise organisational learning, and that comes from both the literature and what the nurses are saying in their feedback. There needs to be equitable access to opportunities, and I alluded to that earlier with the learning events. Nurses who work night shift only weren't getting access to those events. Those that work in the central belt of Scotland opposed to the north were getting more opportunities. Collaborative and active approaches to knowledge sharing are desired by nurses, and leveraging that pool of knowledge that each nurse brings is really, really important. And that comes up in the literature. There was a study looking at how teams function during COVID times, and knowledge sharing where everyone was redeployed and put into an environment they weren't familiar. Utilising each other's knowledge was really important. But again, like I says, organisational culture comes into that. And external factors such as revalidation with the NMC every 3 years may act as a potential enabler for nurses to engage effectively in organisational learning dissemination. And part of that comes from some of the feedback that came through that nurses don't always utilise their CPD time effectively. And there's can be lots of factors contributing to that. If the organisation cancels it, then how can we expect nurses to value it? And some managers felt that nurses view it as an extended break. So utilising their revalidation, which they feel is important and they're not getting enough support with, as a potential way to promote and encourage them to get involved. So just tying things together, in terms of moving forward for this project, for the develop phase, which was the third stage of the project, that's not quite complete, and it's important, I think, to achieve stakeholder focus groups to focus down on potential solutions that are important to those people and pick one and really work through it together to make sure that it's suitable for all stakeholders. And then following this, which would be the fourth stage, deliver, which wasn't intended to be part of this project due to time constraints, would be to implement the solution and through iterative development, refine and enhance the strategy based on user feedback. So I just want to say a huge thanks to Evie for supporting me through the project, and to NHS24 for allowing me back into the organisation, even when I moved on to a new role at NHS Tayside. So I'm happy to take any questions.
Well done, Cian. That's a massive amount of work, and for the audience, just reminding everyone that generally you only have maybe a kind of 6 to 10 week period at maximum to be able to collect the data, just because of the time constraints of the BMSc. Do we have a question from audience? James.
Take the opportunity. Well, I just wonder then how it's going to be taken forward, Kieran, because obviously you have this information now, and are you going to be sharing this with NHS24? Are there plans to actually operationalise any of this? Because it would be a shame not to capture it.
Absolutely. So I have quite a good relationship with one of their associate medical directors and their senior nurse for education who supported me with the project. So the plan now is to present what I have to the medical directorate and the practice education team, and then to try and get support to run those focus groups, which will require more buy-in from the organisation, to then move forward with one potential strategy. NHS24 are having challenges with recruitment and with retention of nurses, so there's definitely support from their end to get something that works, because they know that this is an issue that is leading to losing nurses, which is obviously the last thing that we want. So yeah, the next step is to present to the senior leaders there.
Thank you.
Thank you, Cian. And hopefully the medical school can continue to support you, because I know you'll be returning to a busy life of year 4 as well as doing all that. So that's a big ask, but we'll see if we can find a way to help you balance that workload. Lots of work there done really efficiently in that short space of time. So you should be really proud of your kind of achievements within that. So great job for you. Okay, again, just be mindful of time, and we'll move on to the third and last speaker this afternoon. Hello.
Can you hear me?
Yep, can. And you just need you to share your screen. And that's it. Over to
you. Thank you so much. So hi, everyone. I'm Volantis, and I hope you're having a lovely evening. So today I'm here to present to you my project titled Using Artificial Intelligence as a Learning Tool, Student and Staff Perspectives. So firstly, going a bit into the background of the topic. So AI has been a term that has been used for a long time in the last 30 or so years, but has truly exploded in both development and popularity within the last couple of years. In general, it's used to describe any machine with the ability to perform tasks and achieve goals, and this is compared to anything similar or greater than human intelligence. So specifically focusing on the relevant subfield of AI, generative AI, which is where you'll find platforms such as ChatGPT and Copilot. And this is a form of AI where users will input prompts into the tool and receive human-like responses through text, images, or audio. This is done through a complex process of statistical analysis and something called natural language processing, which basically uses that analysis to estimate the correct answer. And the technology for this, as many have seen, has truly been groundbreaking throughout the last few years. So focusing on the field of education in 2024, more than 50% of undergraduate students across the UK were using generative AI within learning in their courses. And even more specifically within medical education, literature supports that there's an increasing trend of medical students using this within the learning, both to enhance but also optimize their self-directed learning. So kind of two approaches there. These trends in combination highlight the importance of effective and ethical implementation of both a novel but also transformative learning tool due to its large impact and learning environment within the curricula of medical schools. And for background of a similar study through my literature search, there was no similar study that explored the perceptions of students or staff within medical schools in the UK. So going into the aim and research question. So the aim of the project was to identify the perceptions of medical students and staff on the use of AI as a learning tool in order to identify how to best integrate this within our curricula at Dundee. The research question specifically focusing on what are the perceptions of medical students and academic staff in the University of Dundee on student use of AI as a learning tool. Going into the methodology and methods. So the qualitative case study approach was used. This was done to explore the experiences of the participants within their setting. Semi-structured interviews were done both in Ninewells, in person, and Teams meeting. And this approach was used due to its explorative nature of the topic area, allowing me to kind of explore the topic further rather than a fully structured interview. Inclusion criteria were any students within the medical or BMSc programs and academic staff, which were staff involved in the delivery of teaching. 12 participants were recruited, 8 students and 4 academic staff, and member check-in was utilized in order to improve the ability and reliability of the data through sending over the transcript, but also through sending over key themes that were gained from that transcript, which I would like to mention as one of the limitations of the study, due to this process having to happen after some part of the data analysis. It meant that there was a lag between the interview and the participants receiving the member checking kind of information, which meant that there could have been a bit less accuracy in how much they remembered of the interview. A thematic analysis framework was utilized for the data analysis process, generating codes, searching for the themes within those codes, and then constant review and presentation writing. Going next into the findings of this project. So I like to present these findings from 2 aspects. So in green, you have the perceptions of students and staff with regard to learning with AI, and on the right side in blue, the perceptions of the implementation of this tool within the institution. So 4 main themes were identified with 13 sub-themes. So firstly, going into using AI in learning, this particular theme was looking at how students utilize this tool and what they perceived as strengths. One key strengths, in general, all participants, both students and staff, agreed on the strengths for this. The first sub-theme is supportive learning. So students enjoyed the generation of learning materials through artificial intelligence, but also breakdown of more complex and in-depth material that allowed them to understand topics better. Another key sub-theme was efficiency of learning. So students viewed this tool as a way to basically summarize and categorize information in a way that allowed them to optimize their studying and allow more time for other forms of revision. Another sub-theme that was prevalent was its use due to its personalizability and ease of use. So all students found that this was an accessible tool that was able to personalize it to your own style of learning. And finally, going into the understanding of both staff and students, there seemed to be quite a limited understanding of how this tool functioned as a concept. So that was another aspect of it. Going into the concerns and cautions of this project or the other sub-theme. So firstly, this is describing kind of the key concerns that students and staff had when thinking about utilizing this tool within learning. So firstly was accuracy and reliability. So this is looking at a concept where it's basically known as hallucination, where AI will sometimes provide information that is inaccurate, and that was something that was a prevalent concern for students. But in addition to the inability to check the reliability and sources of the answers they received. Going into academic and ethical integrity, this is looking at plagiarism, which was a major concern, again, for both students and staff. And finally, more of a specific focus, students under societal responsibilities were more concerned with the environmental impact of the tool, and staff were more concerned with the bias that the data will produce as AI uses data that is already biased through the real world and basically highlights and enhances those biases. In terms of the institutional support and the perception surrounding that, both stakeholders agreed that there was a lack of clear and concise communication by the university. And even though there are policies regarding this for both students and staff, none of the participants had knowledge of it. Another key sub-theme was the imbalance of policing and support. So students and staff felt that the university focused more on managing and preventing misuse rather than supporting and enhancing efficient use and ethical use within learning. And finally, there was inadequate support for staff, specifically regarding to what channels to go if a student required support for this. Finally, for training and future integration, all stakeholders again agreed that proficiency training should be added within the curriculum, which should cover aspects like understanding how it works, its strengths and weaknesses, and real-life examples, alongside developing resources and teaching. Although, to highlight, this was a mixed response of both optional teaching on Moodle and core teaching within core lessons such as introduction to blocks. And finally, both stakeholders agreed that there should be an open and proactive approach that the university takes, as this will be an important part of future in both medical education and medicine as well. Finally, going into the conclusion and recommendations, to go back to the research question, AI is perceived by both students and staff as a learning tool with high potential in student learning. Both stakeholders agreed on the strengths and limitations of this tool and agreed about the current guidance in teaching is insufficient and they desire further support to improve and utilize AI in learning better. Some recommendations for future practice, so providing clear guidance and signposting to the university policy, developing some proficiency teaching of the proficiencies that I mentioned before as a mix of optional online and core teaching within the curriculum, train key members of staff as AI leaders that will be able to act as support channels for students, and finally maintain an open and progressive approach by interacting with both stakeholders, literature, frameworks, and other institutions to maintain a discussion about this. And finally, for research, It's just looking at exploring this within a particular stakeholder group, potentially producing other similar projects in other institutions throughout Scotland and the UK. As I mentioned, this was the only one of its kind so far within the UK, so it'd be interesting to see the generalizability through this and exploring the impact of proficiency training, and finally triangulating data through a quantitative approach with a similar aim. And these are references, and thank you so much for listening.
Again, thank you so much, Ronald. Well done on that. And a really topical area that obviously I have a bias as being your supervisor, but this was one that you initiated yourself in terms of bringing forward as a potential research kind of area that you were keen to pursue. So I think again it has really important findings for us. I can see in particular we have members of the learning technology team on the call within it. So I don't know if they haven't, but I don't want to generate or put people on the spot, but if it questions in particular. Stephen?
Yeah, happy to come in here. Thanks very much, Lance. I really enjoyed that presentation. There's a couple of challenges I think you'll know with training. Is there particular tools that we should focus on? That's one of the challenges. And another potential challenge is trying to distill the generic advice or the generic policies down to particular levels, whether that's at the level of a particular assignment or a particular task. So there's a kind of couple of questions in there in one, which I hope you're able to shine a bit of light on.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much for your question. So in terms of your first question about the training of members, yes, you're correct. All staff agreed that this should be something that begins as optional due to the nature of training in medical education. But particularly, this should be a voluntary action first. So staff volunteer to be trained within this kind of in similar proficiencies to students. And they basically act as basic support and guidance, but also as a channel that are able to guide students on the correct resource to use, as it seems that there's a clear challenge with students right now in identifying the correct resource, which could be done through good communication, but also would be nice to have some guidance on the perspective from someone involved in medical education as well, and giving their kind of perceptions on the training and using that to guide students as well in that more specialized nature that you mentioned as well. In terms of specializing it, yeah, it's quite hard to kind of identify specific things. I think the most important thing that students highlighted is having a clear guideline and concise kind of understanding of what is acceptable to use within learning and what is not acceptable to use within learning, because that's what students are currently very confused about, is where and how can they use this. So I think using real life examples of ethical and safe ways of doing this would be a good approach to encounter and answer that kind of challenge of that specialized nature of that teaching. And sorry, what was your last question?
I think you've actually kind of covered it there. It was I think it was about distilling the generic guidelines down to a particular task or particular assessments. And yes, you kind of talked about that through good use of examples, real life examples. So yes, that's great. Thank you. Yeah, I think just to add on to that, I think, yeah, it is very much so a case similar to medicine where we have our own frameworks that are wide and kind of a wide overview, and it's using that specialized nature of doctors to apply that to specific instances. So that's kind of where that staff support would come in, is you'd be able to apply those guidelines, those general guidelines, to specific student scenarios, hopefully. Thank you so much.
Thank you, well done. So again, a really interesting area, and one I would hope that you will encounter. We'll try and embed some teaching into that as we progress through the years 4 and 5, as you return to that as well. So I'm going just to, as we're talking, hopefully you can see my screen, and I've dropped into the chat. There is a link that people can utilize in order to vote for their favorite presentation for today. I think it's a really hard choice to make between the three finalists. They've all contributed in very different ways to areas that are really important, both within medical education and for clinical practice going forward. So I'm glad to have the shared pain or challenge for the audience and kind of looking for that. And James is going to kind of collate and look out for this information, so we'll just give it a little second for that. Whilst you're waiting, and I know some of us have joined in laterally, we are still on always recruiting for OSCEs and for invigilation for forthcoming examinations over the next few weeks. So for some of you, this may also have utility.
I'm going to be the first to offer my congratulations to Kieran. He is the winner of the votes this year. Again, very, very close. But Kieran will now receive the Harden Award, which will be offered later in the year. Remember when it is, Kevin? The current Harden Award's offered?
We provide the Harden Award on the prize giving morning along with the 5th years if Kieran's planned to attend graduation. So he'll get
That's correct. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So well done to all of you. Great projects, great presentations. And I see you've got some support from your classmates here today as well, which is lovely to see as well.
Thank you. Thanks, James. And we'll hand over to Tom. Thank you, Tom.
Thanks very much, everyone. As ever, a really high standard of work, but also the presentation and calmness under duress in presenting to this sort of audience. So congratulations to Kieran, but also to all three of you for some excellent talks. And I should just mention also to Kevin and James, who administer, support, nurture, mentor all the people who come through the BMSc medical education program. Dundee has a rich tradition in medical education, started by Professor Ronald Harden, but it's continued by the hard work of people like Kevin and James, who continue this really excellent work along with the rest of the faculty. So congratulations to them, as well as to Kieran and to Hannah and to Volantis. Next week, I don't have anything in the program, so you can take a week off. If you think you have something you'd like to present, then please do let me know. But I will take a brief hiatus, a well-earned rest for 1 week, and then we're back later in May with asthma. So the new asthma guidelines, something close to my heart as an asthma doctor, will be explaining how the new asthma guidelines affect each and every one of you, because asthma is such a common syndrome that you will undoubtedly see some asthma at some point, and we're seeing a once in a generational shift in asthma care. So I'll send more information about that. Please do try to tune into that. It's sunny. Go outside, enjoy the sunshine, particularly Kieran and Hannah and Volantis. Go on and get a bit of vitamin D. The rest of us have a good rest of the day and weekend, and I'll see you again in a couple of weeks' time. Take care, everyone.